I'm glad to be here. I'm very honoured to be invited to come to speak to you here today. It is my second time ever in Russia. Last time was in 1982, so I see a few changes, I can tell you. I'm here today to talk to you about mental health promotion at work and to talk to you a little bit about some European models and experiences. I am doing so on the basis of having been involved in this area for the last 20 odd years and have been part of two, I think, very significant initiatives which have taken place not in single European countries but across European Union countries. The first one is in connection with the European Network for Workplace Health Promotion, which is mentioned by Dr. Saxena just a moment ago, which this year is celebrating its 20th anniversary. This was a network of public health and indeed occupational health centres across the European member states who came together to deal with the issue of how do we promote health in the workplace, not just about how do we deal with occupational risks, but how do we bring public health into the workplace as well. I will tell you a little bit about them as I go along. Secondly, I want to talk to you on the basis of my experience in helping to set up a European network for mental health promotion, which in fact covers all stages of the life cycle, so that there are sections to deal with young people, sections to deal with people who are at work, and sections which are to deal with older people. And this is a collection of tools and approaches to promoting mental health in these three different settings. A little bit about the background here. The European Union has been interested in mental health, broadly speaking, in the workplace, going back at least 15 years, if not longer. You could argue it goes back to the Framework Directive in 1989. But despite this, in many of the member states, there's been a relatively low emphasis on mental health issues in society at large and in the workplace. I was once quoted to me by an employer's representative at one of these meetings that they approach the issue of mental health in the workplace with a mixture of fear and ignorance. And this, I think, characterises far too many people's reaction still today. However, there are high costs to all involved, and they're not just financial, they are also personal, they are social, they are health and well-being related, and they affect both individuals, families, which are often forgotten about, they affect health services, they affect society at large, they affect workplaces, of course, as well. We've heard about the issue of stigma, which explains a lot of the reasoning why action on the ground has been so difficult to establish. We've heard about the issue of lack of knowledge. Most people in most workplaces don't know what to do when it comes to either managing threats to mental health which come from the workplace or in dealing with other mental health related issues at the workplace. So despite these unpromising backgrounds, the European Union has taken quite a lot of initiatives over the years, and I'll tell you a little about some of them shortly. But one of the things which I think is significant is that we are moving from illness models towards wellness models. We are looking to move from the situation about knowing about what breaks health to what makes health, and the workplace is important in this. We're looking to move not to ignore treatment, but to add to treatment the issue of prevention and promotion. And the workplace is one of the settings in which this is quite possible. And we're moving towards settings rather than just dealing with the population at large. And by settings I mean workplace, I mean older age institutions, I mean schools, anywhere where people congregate and work together in organised settings. Just to say, as I've mentioned, the European Commission has been involved in the area of mental health at work for quite a while. This is despite the fact that under most of the treaties that founded the European Union, they don't have a competence in it. So most of what they have done has been by agreement with the various member states. Some of these initiatives are put up here on the slide in front of you, but there have been others. There's the Framework Agreement on Work-Related Stress, which was put together by the European social partners, that is the employers and the trade unions in particular, governments as well, in 2004. And this offered a model of something which was not legislatively based, but agreement-based as a means of moving forward in the area. I think that is an important model which people should consider. Not everything has to be mandated by legislation, it can be by agreement. There was talk for a long time under the Barroso Commission of having a mental health directive. In other words, a directive being where they could oblige governments to implement national legislation on mental health. At the last minute, this was pulled, and it became to be replaced by the Mental Health Pact, which, amongst other things, looked at mental health in the workplace. And this was a much more agreement-based approach to how to deal with mental health in the workplace. And I'll talk a little bit about this as well. I think the Workplace Health Promotion Network, of which I was a founder member, was important and still is important and is undergoing regeneration as we speak, because it has brought to the attentions of governments and to the attention of the Commission the possibilities for bringing public health issues and approaches into the workplace, which formerly didn't exist in any organised way. And it did so with a unique European flavour. Unlike the United States, where workplace health promotion began, it is a much more structural approach and far less individually oriented approach than we might find elsewhere. I'm going to base most of the rest of my talk on some work that we did for in connection with 2 or 3 other organisations, one of whom is here today, the University of Nottingham, for DG Employment. This is the director dealing with employment-related issues in the European Commission, where we produced some guidelines, amongst other things, for employers on how to deal with mental health issues in the workplace. And there are other guidelines there. EU OSHA were working more or less at the same time on the same issue as us. We did try to talk to each other, and we did to some degree, so we don't disagree with each other in what we've done. And there's been the European Network for Mental Health Promotion, as I've mentioned earlier as well. Just to say that most of what we're talking about here is based on the ecological model of health. That is one in which the individual is situated within successive layers of community, family, social, and society at large. And that if you wish to influence health, either positively or negatively as it happens, you must intervene at all of these levels. And that is the fundamental underpinning theory of what we are trying to do here. Some of the other considerations that we took when we were developing these guidelines for DG Employment was that health promotion was very important, and that it emphasises the maintenance of good health and the promotion of better health, not just the treatment of poor health or the prevention of ill health. It talks about improving from the current situation as well as protecting the current situation. It emphasises the role of strong policy in the area of supporting action. Now, this is obviously an issue at national level, but it's also a case at workplace level. Some of the earliest work we did in the 1990s in European workplaces showed that where there was a policy for health in a workplace, this was generally followed by some sort of budget, which was generally followed by some sort of action. But if you didn't have strong policy, action was very difficult indeed to establish. And when I talk about strong policy, I'm talking about statements which are agreed between employer and employee that mental health is an important issue to address. It's about enabling healthy choices in more healthful environments. In other words, it's emphasizing the individual act within an environmental context. And this interaction is very important because it points to 2 particular areas of intervention that you might look at: the individual and the environment in the workplace. It emphasises joint efforts by all stakeholders. One of the important points to realise about workplace health promotion is that it is not generally legislated for. Except in Germany, where it is mandated for the sickness insurance funds, it is generally something which is done by agreement. And in this case, it means agreement between employer and employee. And it emphasises the role of settings. In other words, each setting that we exist in, our homes, our workplaces, our communities, etc., has its own unique characteristics which can be turned towards having a health promotion agenda. A little bit about the workplace and mental health, and some of the previous speakers have said this. It's always one of the hazards of speaking late in a session that the people before you have said much of what you want to say. But nonetheless, just to repeat very quickly, because they did influence our work on the guidelines. The first is that generally speaking, on average, work is good for health. It's not bad for health except in certain circumstances. How work can damage health is legislated for under health and safety legislation, including psychosocial risks that we've heard earlier on. Nonetheless, of all of the settings, if you take schools, for example, as a comparison, workplace is one of the most difficult to operate in. for a number of reasons. Firstly, because there are different power relationships between the stakeholders. Employers and employees do not start from the same base of power, and that is difficult and has to be taken into account. My gosh. Secondly, there are economic imperatives. In other words, workplaces exist to do work, not necessarily to generate health. And you can read some of the rest of them here. Occupational stress is a particular issue, and we've heard a lot about it, and I'm not going to go through it anymore here today, except to say that it is the only issue in mental health that is generally legislated for in the workplace. It is something which employers and employees must address, even if they don't do so well. Whereas the other mental health issues are not necessarily legislated for. And what workplaces are faced with is some kind of interaction between causes inside and outside of the workplace and effects inside and outside of the workplace which feed off each other. And this makes the issue of dealing with mental health quite difficult in the workplace. So what can be done at the workplace? You can, broadly speaking, do health and safety, you can do occupational health, you can do occupational hygiene, you can do health promotion, and you can do return to work. And you can group the first three of these under occupational health approaches. We thought that when we were considering how you would actually integrate a lot of these approaches, that the three of them tend often to be in silos and not to relate to one another too well. But nonetheless, when you look at it, there are shared outcomes of these different approaches, and they do share some common methods, and they do have some methods specific to each other. In other words, in order to deal with mental health in the round at an integrated level, it is not necessarily the case that you have to invent something entirely new. It is a question of building upon approaches which already exist. So, for example, we talked about, under the three approaches, that there are three stages. One is to do with information gathering and analysis. The second is to do with making interventions of one sort or another. And the third is to look at the outcomes which might result from this. And when you look at these in a little more detail, at information gathering and analysis, for example, in occupational safety and health, you're talking about identifying hazards and identifying risks associated with those hazards. In mental health promotion, you're looking at mental health needs analysis. What is it that people need in general to improve their mental health? And with rehabilitation and return to work, you are talking about analysing the data that you might have on absence. It is extraordinary, many employers don't. You are looking then, when it comes to interventions and methods that might be used to carry out the goals of these information analyses, you're looking at making interventions in physical environment, at the psychosocial work environment. You're talking about education, work design, job design, and so on. And these are common pretty much to all three elements, with the exception, I would say, of rehabilitation and return to work, where you can add in case management and rehabilitation. In other words, the active management of an individual to get them back to work and the services that they need to get them back to work. And you're looking at common outcomes a lot of the time as well. I just want to come towards a conclusion here by talking about what, even in the many of the best environments or workplaces, is current silos of activity. By that I mean that you have got prevention and health and safety, which is generally legislated for, which is often not done terribly well, but is at least legislated for, and people are obliged to address it. And you've got two other areas, return to work and promotion, which are not legislated for, generally speaking, and which, if they exist, tend not to relate to each other or to health and safety in any structured way. This is a problem, because I think we are not making the best or the most of what can be done in workplaces if we just install three parallel streams of activity. And so for an integrated approach, I'm talking about taking the best of all of these three approaches and integrating them in a meaningful way. And this means integration through policies. In other words, the policies which govern these at workplace level must be integrated, or at least refer to one another. The people who implement them must be integrated as well. In other words, they must have training and knowledge in all three areas. The data flow, the information flow between these three activities should be more systematic, because in many cases it doesn't happen. And lastly, the activities, as I've pointed out, can be integrated as well. It's not necessarily as difficult as it might appear. That is the message I hope you will take from my presentation today. And I just want to leave you with some useful references, and there are many, many more. One is to the mental health guidance that I've just mentioned. The second is to mentalhealthpromotion.net, which gives you a lot of the detail on our activities in mental health in the workplace. And also to the EU OSHA report on mental health in the workplace, to which you could add the OECD work, and indeed I think the Canadian work is smashing as well. Thank you for your attention.